Today's episode is going to be a bibliographic mystery, and I need your help, the YouTube audience, to solve it with me. Now, it's not going to be a murder mystery. Of course, there are very few murders in the rare book world, except maybe over an underpriced book at a book fair. And it's not going to be a whodunit, it's more of a who wrote it. And that is where you can come in if you can help me figure out who wrote the object of this mystery, a 17th century astronomical manuscript in my hands. I will certainly pay a commission on its sale, so therefore you have not only an incentive of intellectual curiosity, but also a financial incentive to assist me. Another reason because I want to engage a wider audience in this search is because I need to catalog this for the upcoming New York Antiquarian Book Fair in April, the most prestigious book fair of the year, where all the booksellers bring out their big guns, the best books and manuscripts they have in their inventory, and put them on display to entice curators, collectors, and librarians to purchase them. So I certainly could use the assistance because I have, as a bookseller, limited time resources, of course, and I cannot put a PhD level amount of research into every book and manuscript that passes through my hands, and I would like to get this written up in time for the show. So let me tell you a little about this manuscript first and why it's so intriguing, and then tell you the mystery. This manuscript is 130 pages, 260 leaves. It's written in Latin throughout, the lingua franca of its day. And it also contains many charming, very well executed manuscript diagrams. Now, unfortunately, it does not have the title page, which would give definitive evidence as to who, when, and where it was written. But when I purchased this manuscript, I intuitively felt that it was 17th century English. Now, my intuition was based on years of experience, seeing handwriting, the feel and look of the paper, etc. But it was somewhat quickly corroborated because even though it is written in Latin, there are some occasional marginal annotations here in a contemporary hand in English that say words like good or sun and moon. So I felt it was an English manuscript, and 17th century English astronomy manuscripts, as you can imagine, are quite desirable. Now, it was rebound in the 19th century, but it does have a nice red Morocco spine label that does say in English astronomy manuscript. So again, I imagined that it probably passed through several generations into the hands of someone at least English speaking in the 19th century. One thing I loved about this manuscript is it was a very high-level astronomy manuscript. It was not a basic textbook or something to that effect. It opens with a very handsome diagram here of a mechanical picture of the Earth with a quotation from Latin, Ponderibus librata suis, referring to the Earth, that it's poised by its own weight. And it goes through astronomy and geography, especially touching upon rather remarkable chapters on America, including New England and Virginia and even California in the 17th century. So that is quite remarkable. It continues with some scientific instruments and books on horology, etc. Now, I hope this gives you some insight into how a rare book dealer thinks. But the first thing I have to ask myself is, what type of manuscript is this? What can I learn about it? Now, there are basically, I would say, 5 categories of manuscripts I can think of off the top of my hand, at least. One is an author's manuscript, the type of manuscript, a working copy, where you would see many corrections and changes, and would not be a particularly neat and presentable manuscript, but that is sort of the holy grail, the type of manuscript that every rare bookseller wants, a manuscript written by the author, him or herself. The second type of manuscript is a fair copy manuscript, a copy of a known printed text. Now, that's often the type of manuscript that makes a rare bookseller run to the hills and hide, because we do not like derivative text, copies of known printed works. closely allied with that perhaps is a sort of commonplace book, a manuscript that's been compiled by from several known printed sources into a new work. Fourth, it could be a manuscript in circulation, or print, we would say, which is a manuscript written by the author, but maybe they did not have the finances to see it through the printing press, or was not worthy of printing, but it still was worthy of being studied by scholars and friends in the author's circle, so that they would make a manuscript copy of the author's manuscript. And finally, it could be a manuscript prepared for publication, a very neat, presentable manuscript itself. Now, I quickly dismissed that this was the author's manuscript. Again, it's too neat and presentable without a lot of those corrections you would see in an author's manuscript. Is it a fair manuscript? Well, thankfully, because of the amount of resources we have at the tips of our fingers through Google Books or WorldCat, I could immediately start plugging in chapter titles, even some of the text, to see if it matched any known printed work. After a few hours of doing that very carefully, I could not find any very clear match that it was a fair copy manuscript. And similarly, that should be even easier if it was compiled from multiple sources, because there would be multiple works at least that would give some sort of match to the manuscript text itself. So that sort of left in my mind that either it was a manuscript in circulation or a manuscript prepared for printing. I tend to believe it's the last category, manuscript prepared for printing, largely because it also contains some catchwords at the bottom of pages. Those are words that match exactly the word at the top of the following page, and that was often used during the printing process to keep the ordering of the pages correct, both in printing and in subsequent binding of the printed pages. So that is only my working theory for now, so without definitive proof. But this is where the intriguing mystery comes in now. As I went through the manuscript very carefully, I noticed on the back of one of the pages it says in English, and remember this is a Latin manuscript, it says, "In our voyage to Pennsylvania, we meeting with contrary winds." Now, the last time I checked, Pennsylvania was in America, so my neurons started firing, and I said, whoa, this could be a manuscript with 17th century American connections, in a manuscript that was definitively shown to have been in the colonies in the 17th century, especially a scientific manuscript, would be quite a discovery in terms of importance and, of course, in value over just a 17th century English manuscript, generally, let's say. So then I started searching every page very carefully for additional evidence. And thankfully, on one of the last pages here, it says the names of two previous owners, provenance for the book. And it says Thomas Bibb, and it has a Latin expression here, which basically translates as that he is the legal owner of this book, and John Meredith. Now again, because of those resources at the tips of our fingertips, I could quickly plug into Google Books the names Thomas Bibb and John Meredith and look for the coincidence of those names together. And the only time they appear is actually in the genealogical records of Burlington, New Jersey at the end of the 17th century. So American Provenance, where Thomas Bibb is recorded as a Burgess, at least descended from the House of Burgess, in Virginia, which would have been, the earliest democratically elected body in the New England colonies. And John Meredith, and he is put down as a recorder of the town, as well as having run a schoolhouse. I could even find the will of John Meredith from 1701, where it showed that he had a remarkably large library for the early colonial period of more than 500 books. And there was a list of debtors on the estate, including Thomas Bibb, which indicates to me at least that he probably acquired this manuscript from John Meredith after his death. Now, there are few biographical tidbits available for Thomas Bibb, except that he died shortly thereafter in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which really goes hand in hand here with that English note about the voyage to Pennsylvania. So this is an astronomical manuscript with early American provenance with very high certainty, I would say, which is really quite remarkable, I think. Now, the big question is, who wrote the manuscript? The signatures of John Meredith and Thomas Bibb here do not match exactly the handwriting of the manuscripts. They were probably early owners of the manuscript. So, of course, I would like to know was this manuscript actually written in the early American colonies, which would be truly remarkable, or was it a manuscript written in England, let's say, and then brought over to the colonies? This, of course, immediately opens the rabbit hole for investigation into the history of astronomy in the early colonies. Now, the Puritans, of course, very quickly took up astronomy, especially the new astronomy, largely because Puritan doctrine sort of viewed God as the great geometer, that the evidence, I would say, of his intricate plans could be revealed through astronomy and mathematics. And we see this right away with Harvard taking an interest in astronomy from its earliest days in 1639 to many of the earliest almanacs printed by Stephen Day in the 1640s often included astronomical calculations. And we can start to investigate some of the earliest American astronomers with the hope that we would find some surviving manuscript or letter and we could match their handwriting with the manuscript at hand here. And I assure you I have not begun to do any of that research at all. That is the purpose of this video, so I leave that up to you. Now, some of the earliest American astronomers included John Winthrop, the son of the governor of Massachusetts, the first John Winthrop, who was an early member of the Royal Society, that illustrious scientific society in England. And it's recorded that he brought with him to the colonies a remarkable library of fine books and manuscripts. So he earned himself the appellation of America's first astronomer. However, competing with that as America's first astronomer was another man named Arthur Strora. He's actually noted in some of Newton's early notebooks as somebody that he wanted to exceed or excel. So wouldn't you like to be somebody that Isaac Newton said that he wanted to do better than? Arthur Strora in Maryland actually started recording some early calculations of the path of a comet, and it came to be known as Strora's Comet. It was later renamed after calculations on its return voyage, and today it's known familiarly as Halley's Comet. So it could have been Arthur Strora who was on the tip of every school kid's tongue instead of Halley. But time had a different decision to make there. So could I match any of those astronomers to the handwriting in this book is a big question. Now, it doesn't also have to be an American astronomer. As much as I'm filled with hopeful optimism that would be the case, it certainly could be an English astronomer of the period, and some famous astronomers come to mind like Vincent Wing, who printed a work in 1656, actually the first translations of Galileo, Copernicus, and Kepler into English. And probably a lot of Vincent Wing's writings correspond to a manuscript of this period. But certainly there's many prominent 17th century English astronomers that could be potential matches for the manuscript at hand. So I would love for you to help me. Again, I will put images on my website, so you can click the link below and see if you can make any matches or further discoveries as to who wrote this remarkable astronomy manuscript with at least American provenance from the 17th century. So good luck to everybody out there, and if you succeed, of course, I will succeed. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll try and do a follow-up video in the future if there are any major discoveries made about this. Please click subscribe for more videos on the rare book trade.